Hello and welcome to Johnny Weiss Solar and Energy Storage Podcast at We have one of my favorite people here, Jeff Spies. What's up, Jeff?
It's been a busy couple days here at RE+.
And what we've done right now is I have podcasted out the podcast booth and we just hijacked it with our own recording equipment. But also still, I want to thank all the people for letting us do podcasting here at RE+. And we're going to talk about a saint, right, today? That's our topic.
We're going to talk about the most influential solar pioneer in the history of our industry.
In the history of the whole universe.
Well, I don't know about the universe, but certainly this planet.
Okay, we can't turn them into, like, once you pass away, that's when you start becoming like a myth and a religious figure and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
And so, I'm sure that all those famous religious figures start out like Johnny Weiss,
Yeah, he was one of a kind, I think is the one way I'd phrase it. Johnny was co-founder of Solar Energy International, and the reason why I say that he's the most influential pioneer in the history of our industry is when Johnny Weiss started Solar Energy International, and they started, actually that was not the first name of the training organization. They had a couple names that predated that. One was Solar Technology Incorporated, I think, but Solar Energy International was the name they assigned to the organization a couple years after the founding, and Johnny wanted to put together solar education that would really have an impact around the world, and that's precisely what occurred with SEI over the years. Is they essentially trained the first several generations of professionals in our industry and had a dramatic positive influence on the rapid deployment of solar energy. So I think that Johnny and the work that he did in Solar Energy International has really been instrumental to helping accelerate the clean energy revolution.
Yeah, I always thought that Johnny was such a nice guy. I met him at I'm pretty sure I met him at one of these shows.
Oh, sure.
I think it was at one of these, what they called Solar Power International, was called RE+ now. And he was always the most friendly guy there and checking in. And even though I wasn't teaching for his organization, he treated me like I was, just like one of those trainers. And he, one of the things that I noticed last night, there was a gathering for everybody celebrating Johnny at the SEI booth. And everyone was there. Everyone that was teaching for any solar organization was there. And it was just showing you how, like, an open door policy that he had, and how he invited me to go to SEI last year too. And I met with them, and it was awesome.
We got that photo of the two of you into our mini documentary we created about Johnny's life that you now can check out on YouTube. Go to the SEI website, go to the SEI Solar Energy International YouTube channel, and you can see a 14-minute mini documentary about Johnny's life, including his reading of his farewell letter by his friend Shane Smith, who helped him in the editing. And it was really a beautiful way to help tell Johnny's story. And we got a nice photo of you and Johnny when you visited Paonia, Colorado. I guess that would have been a little bit more than a year ago. And for those that have an interest in better understanding what I consider to be the most influential pioneer of the solar industry, and I say that having made the only documentary film that I'm aware that exists about the history of our industry, but Johnny's impact on everybody was tremendous. And you're right, he was very embracing of people from every walk, every corner of the world, and he really liked you too. I know that. He and I talked about that many times, and I think he liked and respected the work that you've done. And the one thing about Johnny that was wonderful is, boy, he made everybody around him feel good whenever you were in that crowd with him. He had such an enthusiastic, uplifting spirit. He believed in solar energy, and that enthusiasm was infectious.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed too about, going to that event yesterday is just like, there are so many people there, like at that little event.
Yeah, so we had this memorial service for Johnny yesterday afternoon at the Solar Energy International booth. And what I loved about it is it's all the good people in this industry that, the really cream of the crop, the folks that I think are the soul of the solar industry.
Speaking of souls, I think, and Johnny's soul was definitely there.
I'm still waiting for another visit with Johnny. Actually, he wrote this really beautiful farewell letter and released it the week he passed away. He thought he'd have a bit of extra time left, and I called him the day after reading this letter when it was released, and I called him and I said, Johnny, that was beautiful, because he'd been telling me about it for weeks leading up to the release of the letter that he had been drafting this and composing and editing and trying to strike the right balance. And the nice thing about this letter is not only did it communicate to the world kind of what was going on in his mind and how he saw the industry in the early days all the way through today and what he expected to see happen in the future, but it was an inspirational message to people like us that care about this industry to really continue that push forward, because we haven't gotten to the point that we know that we can get to. When I started my career, decided early on I was going to dedicate my career to making solar photovoltaics the primary source of power generation in the world. And we're far from that, but we're so much further along in the past 20 or so years that I've been engaged in the industry, and it's encouraging to see that we're moving in that direction. I think the goal is attainable. I hope in my life that we will see solar photovoltaics become the leading form of electrical power generation based upon the statistics that we see now. I feel that's a goal that's within reach.
And Johnny is very responsible for kickstarting the industry. It's like, I wonder how many more gigawatts are in the world right now because of Johnny, like power and just like kicking electrons into the grid just from that bright sun and just from, that kickstart. It's
absolutely. Yeah, it's fascinating too, because I think that a lot of folks that would see this probably have familiarity with Solar Energy International, may have known of Johnny Weiss. Many may know Johnny Weiss or may have known Johnny Weiss. But I don't know that there's the awareness of how significant his contribution was to all the people that are doing this work day in, day out. The fact is, again, that he trained the people that trained the people that trained the people. So he is kind of like the granddaddy of solar energy training in the world, not just in the US, but in the world.
Yeah, and one of the things that was also kind of interesting is Johnny and I won a similar award. We won the Claudia Wentworth Award. And you won that too, right?
I did.
All right.
Yeah.
So you and Rebecca Wren won it the first time.
I think it was the first time.
That it was out. And then last year, Mark Moroz and Johnny Weiss won.
And sadly, we lost Mark also. In fact, the thing that I got to say about Mark Moroz, who started his career with Spectralab originally, which was in the 1970s when they were making Spectralab had evolved from the space program, and they were the first company to really target what at that time was referred to as terrestrial solar,
on the Earth. What a crazy concept.
Well, because it was ridiculously expensive in those years, but Mark had started his career making space solar cells and then starting to make solar cells for terrestrial applications on the Earth. And Johnny Weiss credited Mark Moroz with teaching him about photovoltaics. And when I was talking with Mark about this, Mark said, Johnny taught me how to install photovoltaics. So essentially the way I look at it is Mark was the granddaddy of teaching people how photovoltaics works at a physics level and a fundamental theoretical level. Johnny was the originator of taking that technology and teaching people how to actually install it in a way that it actually worked for homes and businesses and remote power systems. So sadly, we lost Mark Moroz a few months prior to Johnny's passing. And as far as I can say, those two were the tag team. They were the OGs of solar training. Mark Moroz doing the training of how PV works, Johnny Weiss doing the training for professionals of how to design and install a photovoltaic system so it works well for the long term.
Yeah, and so when Bill Brooks and I co-won the Claudia Wentworth Award this year, just like a month ago or something like that, and so I made sure to thank and pay tribute to Johnny and Mark, who are two solar superheroes. And I do have both of those guys on other podcasts too. So we're going to have links in the show notes to the video that you were just mentioning and to the podcast where I have Mark Moroz on the podcast and then also with Johnny Weiss. And it was kind of fun that we got Johnny Weiss in there. I'm trying to think of how it started. There's another old-timer solar guy named, who I'm sure you know, and his name is Terrence. You know Terrence?
Terrence who?
Terrence Parker.
Oh, I know Terrence, sure.
Yeah, Terry Parker.
Terry Parker,
yeah.
Sure. Terry's a great guy.
And so I think what it was is I think I told Johnny that Terrence is going to be on the show. And he's like, oh, I want to be on it with him. And we were like, let's surprise him. And so when Terrence came on the show, I was like, hey, Terrence, we've got a surprise guest on the podcast with you. And then it was like we made Terrence guess who it was and stuff like that.
Well, I'm sure you made his day.
Yeah. And then it ended up Johnny, he was controlling the interview towards the end of the podcast too. So that was kind of fun also.
boy, Johnny just had that infectious enthusiasm. He would get everybody so excited. He would get excited, and it was fun to be around him. He had the best laugh. So when you were in an environment where Johnny, where fun was happening, and he would get all energized and amped up, boy, it was a special feeling. And I'm sad that we won't have that directly, but after he wrote that farewell letter, and I talked with him the day after, and he told me he was anticipated entering hospice soon, and he was explaining to me the criteria for hospice and what that involved. And I think he figured, and I did too, that he would have a couple weeks remaining. And so we ended the call because we've been talking on a pretty regular basis over the past year after he had gotten his cancer diagnosis. And actually, they thought he wasn't going to make it back home after he spent about a month in the hospital. He lasted another year. They thought it was only going to be a few more weeks, and we talked regularly. So that last conversation I had with Johnny was kind of on the mindset of, okay, keep me posted on everything that's going to happen. I'll talk to you soon. And after he passed away, it was only 2 days later that he died. And I thought, oh gosh, I never told him I loved him at that time. I had previous to that, but I said, and I never really said goodbye. And then I thought, that's kind of a nice way to finish, my relationship on Earth with Johnny, is to be expecting that next call. And I'm still expecting that next call. So Johnny, give me a call when you can.
I think I hear some kind of ethereal ringing right now, Jeff.
I'm looking forward to my next interaction with Johnny, and all I can say is that the way that I look at it is Johnny's legacy really is in us. Essentially, when I think of Johnny, and I will be able to experience Johnny because of all the people that he had such a tremendous impact on, and how those individuals have taken his vision and his dreams and are continuing to fight the good fight to make this technology the leading form of electrical power generation in the world today.
Yeah, I can remember, and I'm thinking like specific show, and I think it's happened a few times. And I think it was like 2014, and we had SPI in Orlando. And I remember that it was my first SPI that I did an NEC workshop at, and I did it by myself. And I remember Bill Brooks walked into the room. I asked him a question, and he's like, I wrote that one. And then later I asked him to do it with me the next year, and we've been doing it ever since for every show. But Johnny came in there too. And I was, I was a little nervous because he's the competition in sort of a way, I don't really look at it as competition, but I'm more green at that time. And it's like, here comes this guy that's been doing this for all these years. And he was just going, great job and stuff like that. And then so he was giving me positive feedback, and I loved that. And it was I didn't know him that well at the time. And so he was just very positive.
Absolutely.
And he told me other stories too about how different training organizations he was just trying to work with them. Hey, we're all on the same team. This isn't,
and I'll say that was one thing I really loved when I especially first got involved in the industry, is I used to tell people, it doesn't feel like you're competitors with those companies that are doing the same thing you're doing. It feels like we're all in the same team trying to accomplish the basic end objective of displacing dirty fossil fuels that are really poisonous to our way of life. And, he absolutely believed in supporting folks like yourself who may not have been working within Solar Energy International, but you were doing the work that he cared about. You were furthering the goals of renewable energy. So it's sad that we don't have him around anymore to be that beacon of enthusiasm in the industry. But I'll say again that I feel that the people that were influenced by Johnny really are the ones that'll carry forward that energy and enthusiasm that he brought to the world of solar training, because he inspired me to do the work I do till the day I die. And I'm going to continue trying to do that good work because I believe in this technology. I believe in the benefits that it brings to all species on this planet, and I'm confident that the influence that he's had amongst people like myself is going to carry his legacy forward. So while we don't have Johnny in the original packaging, we have a bit of Johnny in you and me.
Oh, sure, yeah. And I know you said his legacy too, and I was talking to somebody last night that was working on that, somebody named Lex, I guess.
Yes.
And he said he was having a lot of conversations with him towards the end. And it's some kind of international solar training. Do you know more about it than I do, probably?
Yeah, I'll explain it. So what I call this is the quote-unquote Johnny Weiss initiative. And essentially it has several elements, but the basic principle is Johnny cared about bringing solar energy to people all around the world, especially in what we classify as disadvantaged communities. So, he did a lot of work in Africa. He did a lot of work in Native American reservations. These are individuals that oftentimes are economically challenged and also technologically challenged. And Johnny, what he wanted to do is he wanted to bring solar power so you could have lights in medical clinics. So instead of women in Africa having to give birth by kerosene lantern light, you now could have actual solar powered electric lights, which really dramatically improve the quality of life for these disadvantaged communities. So what Johnny wanted to do is help those people that were really in difficult situations. So what his initiative is focused on is bringing in dollars that will then make the training curriculum that Johnny was involved with available to these disadvantaged communities, and to take these key individuals that can bring that education to their part of the world into the training facilities that Solar Energy International has in Colorado, to make them knowledgeable enough so that they can take that and replicate it in their home areas. So essentially the Johnny Weiss initiative is funding that will help create more advocates and trainers of solar energy and replicate that knowledge around the world in a very dramatic way.
So how can we help get that going?
Well, the Solar Energy International does have a fund set up to allow for that program to be successful and bring those folks over from these various parts of the world where you have these deserving communities that really can benefit tremendously from solar energy. Oftentimes it is parts of the world where you've got, they're way off the grid. I mean, when you talk about off grid here in the US, usually off the grid means you can drive to the grid in a few minutes. But when we're talking about off the grid, the way Johnny looked at it, sometimes it's hours down dirt roads to get to the nearest point of grid power. And so those are the people that Solar Energy International is recruiting to bring through the Johnny Weiss initiative to help educate them and provide them with the curriculum so when they go back home they can help educate others. Oftentimes it's not even educating quote unquote contractors or professionals doing installation, it's educating the users of the technology, because one of the big problems we see is that over the years solar energy has often been funded for these remote areas, but especially with the world of lead acid batteries, you know how easy it is to kill off a lead acid battery prematurely. So what we saw is a lot of times the money was given for buying hardware, and then it would go into these communities, and unfortunately, because there was a lack of knowledge of how to maintain the equipment to keep it operational, you would get a battery dying off within a year. And then you had these solar panels that have no batteries to store the power, so it was kind of a bit of a waste. So I think that Johnny, rightfully so, realized that the key to helping make solar power feasible for these remote communities is educating the people that own the system so they could configure it properly, install it safely so that it would last long term, and maintain it over time. So I do feel that his goals and initiatives are critical to helping those disadvantaged communities that he really cared deeply about.
Yeah, I have heard a lot of stories too about people, getting grants, and then what they would do is they would build these solar projects out in India or Africa or something like that, and they got all these batteries and things like that, and then they don't work after a year because somebody didn't know how to maintain it and they did something wrong with the batteries or something like that. So,
and sadly, oftentimes in those situations, there was this perception of, I guess solar doesn't work, when in fact it absolutely does work. It's an incredibly reliable technology when done correctly to provide long-term reliable electricity. The dilemma is that if it's done correctly, and that's a big if, and that's a hard thing to accomplish, and the only way that you're going to make that feasible is through educating the folks that do the installation and the folks that have to own and maintain it over the long haul. So that really is what Johnny's initiative was all about. Is solar energy access for all was one of the phrases that's used in this initiative to really make this technology feasible for these communities, but also sustainable for the long term.
Great. Okay. Well, that's pretty awesome. A good way to keep his soul going on forever. And I was thinking about yesterday too, soul is sun in Spanish, and soul is that part of you that lives forever, I guess you could say. So it kind of fits, and Johnny has a good soul.
It does. Yeah, I think his soul is still with us. And it is kind of an interesting play on words that what I consider to be the true soul of the industry is really that community that Johnny helped build. People like myself and you that cared about doing things right and seeing this technology succeed long term so that we can make energy more sustainable and make our planet healthier over the long term. I feel I got into the industry having worked in the industrial sector for many years, and I had actually worked in the oil and gas industry when I was in college, and I had worked servicing the oil and gas sector when I was in the industrial automation industry prior to getting into the solar photovoltaic business. I had actually dabbled in solar when I was in college in solar water heating, but I had seen a lot of, I guess you could say, serious abuses of the environment from my work in the fossil fuel industry, but also I'm from Detroit. And in the 1970s, when I was growing up as a kid in Detroit, the environmental impact of all of the chemical processing, the steel, the auto industry was really disturbing. So I guess I was influenced at a very young age to recognize that the environment affects us all. Everybody breathes the same air. So it doesn't matter if you're a billionaire or somebody who can't rub two nickels together, we breathe the same air. And unfortunately, there hasn't been a respect for the importance of a healthy environment and long-term sustainability. I'm a gardener, and I think any farmer or any gardener recognizes you can only extract from the soil what you put back into it. And Johnny was all about putting back into the world around him to make the world a healthier place.
Great.
We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSEAN, that's Solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show.
Yeah, and I was thinking too about the word like language and the word soul, and soul being sun, and soul being that part of you that lasts forever. And I bet if you go back into like how the language evolved, I bet they came from the same word.
That's a really interesting point. I had not looked at the etymology of the word solar, but I wonder if soul didn't derive from solar.
I mean, you can even go back and look at Egypt, and they had different gods for different planets, and the sun was like the main one. So, Ra, the sun god.
Well, and I think it's an interesting thing. I've said this to classes that I've taught in the past, that all energy is solar energy. And it's true. Technically, all energy is nuclear energy, but our nuclear reactor for our technology is quite a distance away, so it's a safe nuclear reactor. But the reality is
and
that
it's fusion.
Yeah, and in essence,
fission.
the sun is nuclear energy, but essentially all energy that life in the universe relies on is a function, in essence, of the nuclear energy that comes from the stars. We call our star the sun. Yeah. So when you look at wind and tidal energy and wave energy and oil and gas is solar energy embodied in the plant materials that have decayed and turned into coal and gas and oil. The dilemma is that energy has such a dirty side effect that we prefer to cut out the middleman and use the energy directly from the sun, because that's how you get clean energy. So I think we will win. We are winning, despite the fact that the industry is being, how shall I say, temporarily disadvantaged by the sudden expiration of residential tax credits and also commercial tax credits. The interesting dynamic is this. Even without the 30% tax credit, solar energy is still the cheapest form of electrical power generation. Even without the tax credit, solar energy is the most rapid way to bring new kilowatt hours to the grid or to off-grid. What would you say is this next most cost-effective way of generating electricity next to solar photovoltaics?
Like wind.
True, but then if we say not renewable energy, what would be the most cost-effective way to generate kilowatt hours?
Well, I guess that thing they call natural gas.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about natural gas turbines, today it takes about 7 years to buy a new natural gas turbine. So we know we need more electricity on the grid. And even without the 30% tax credit, solar is still the cheapest way to do it and the fastest way to get new kilowatt hours. So we are being temporarily disadvantaged.
Yeah, they're trying to bump us in the road. And another reason I was thinking too is like pulling away those tax credits and doing all this dramatic stuff. They're desperate. It's like their last chance to try to like hold on to their old way of doing things. And sorry, gas guys, you're just blowing wind.
Well, one thing I'll say about having worked in the oil and gas industry prior to being involved
Are you
in
sure you
solar,
want to talk about that?
well, I'm happy to talk about it because I think, quite honestly, there's a lot of folks like myself whose first foray into the world of energy, in fairness, my first foray into the world of energy was solar water heating, but I was a telemarketer back in the 80s, calling people while they were eating dinner to ask them do you want to save money on your energy bill?
Oh,
and
really?
if they said no...
You were the original solar bro.
Well, at that time we didn't think of us as solar bros, but in essence we did that kind of work. And back at that time, solar water heating was the kind of... And in fact, I had no awareness of solar photovoltaics, maybe a little bit of peripheral awareness of the space cells that were powering satellites at the time, but I only knew about solar from the standpoint that it would heat water. And it was quite a few years before I really had comprehension that solar photovoltaics could take with a flat piece of black glass sitting in the sun, not moving, and generate electricity. I still find that magical, by the way, but it took me quite a few years to find my way back into the solar industry. But when I worked in oil and gas, one thing I'd say is every single oil and gas well that I ever came up on, when you were out there doing work, you could smell that gas. You know how they say natural gas has no odor? Well, that's true for refined natural gas. Then they add some odor back in. But when you're at the well site, that has an odor. You can tell it. And every single well site you go to, you could smell that natural gas. Those are what are referred to as, quote unquote, fugitive emissions. And as many people recognize, methane that comes out of the ground uncontrolled is a super greenhouse gas. It has dramatically higher ability to absorb heat than carbon dioxide. So methane is, sadly, if you drive across West Texas, I a few years ago had the opportunity to go from San Antonio back to Phoenix. Not the most pretty drive, but when you're driving through West Texas with the windows down, you just smell natural gas the entire drive. So that is super greenhouse gas, and that's something that we cannot afford to have happen anymore. So PV, thankfully, is going to beat natural gas because you can get it deployed in about a year and a half at the utility scale. You can get it deployed for DG within a matter of months, and it takes 7 years to get a gas turbine, and it's going to be significantly less expensive. So we will win. We will win.
We will win.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And thanks to Johnny, we are...
Long live Johnny Weiss.
We are, I would say, decades ahead. If it hadn't been for Johnny, the technology definitely wouldn't have accelerated at the pace that it has. So he is having...
Responsible for gigawatts. Terawatts.
Absolutely, and I still look at Johnny, even though I have my top 5 most significant pioneers of the industry when we made our documentary film, which will be debuting next year in October, I think. Solar Roots, the pioneers of PV, and you can
put that in the show notes.
Okay,
so,
well, what I'll say is that I appreciate everything you're doing, Sean.
Thanks,
You're
Jeff.
doing excellent work, and you are part of our ability to help this technology accelerate and succeed long term, and I know we will. So all I can say to your listeners and viewers is do not despair, do not give up. We are winning. We are just experiencing a speed bump in our...
By desperate people, by desperate frackers.
And misguided individuals that don't appreciate that this technology is critical to all species on Earth and our ability to grow electricity to meet the demands so that we don't have to rely on dirty forms of energy.
Long live the sun. Long live Johnny Weiss. Keep it going, Jeff.
Long live Sean White.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. And long live Jeff Spies. All right. Thanks so much, Jeff Spies. And thanks for listening to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. And I know we're still using their booth, and I'm recording with my equipment, but we are recording live from the Power Up Live Pro Studio presented by TerraHive. Thanks to RE Plus and Suncast Media for hosting us. Check things out. Go to SolarSEAN, that's SolarSEAN.com, and get yourself NABCEP certified. And by the way, Jeff is on the NABCEP board, so that's pretty cool. All right, thanks everyone.